Our guest today is the Cook County State's Attorney. She is Cook County's first female state's attorney and first Hispanic state's attorney. Our guest today is a career prosecutor and a lifelong Chicagoan who was born in the Pilsen neighborhood and raised by working-class parents. She earned her undergraduate degree from Loyola University and her law degree from Chicago-Kent College of Law. Our guest today is married to Dr. James Gomez. She and her husband are the proud parents of 4 children. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the City Club of Chicago, Anita Alvarez. Anita? Thank you. Have some fun up there.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Jay. And I know Paul isn't here today, but thank Paul. And he always reminds me that his wife is a proud graduate of Maria High School, as am I. But I want to thank everyone for taking the time out this afternoon and coming here to listen to me speak. This is a great opportunity for me to explain the work that we have been doing at the State's Attorney's Office since I took over. It's now more than 2 years ago. I can't believe that. It's almost, petition time is almost upon us. I'm really not looking forward to that, but it is inevitable. And it is exciting to be here this week as we celebrate St. Patrick's Day in the city of Chicago. Last time I was here, or the first time I was here on Cinco de Mayo, and so I was able to talk a little bit about the Battle of Puebla. And so I was thinking before I came here today, you know, how can I kind of intertwine a Mexican-American and the Irish, seeing that we're here to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And so if you don't know, the Mexican and the Irish truly have a long history, a long history. It's a noble history. And I don't know, and I'm sure there are people in this room that do know the story, but a lot of people don't. And that is a story about the St. Patrick's battalion, the San Patricios. And it's a war that most people have forgotten that the U.S. was fighting against Mexico back in, I believe it was 1845. I don't think it lasted 2 years. But the story is actually, it's really a wonderful story, and there's been many books written on it. And it talks about soldiers, Irish immigrants that literally came straight off of the boat. The American Army promised them citizenship if they went and fought this war for the U.S. against Mexico. And what happened with so many of them when they got down to Mexico is that they so sympathized with the Mexican people, and a lot of the history says a lot of it had to do with the Catholic faith. And they actually switched sides and fought with the Mexicans against the U.S. Now, many of them were actually tried for treason. Many of them were killed, and many of them remained in Mexico. And that's why we have some famous Mexican artist by the name of Pablo O'Gorman. And it really is a rich history, and if you have the chance, there are several books written on it called The Irish Soldiers of Mexico, and there is a plaque in Mexico City honoring all of the Irish soldiers. So I thought that would be a nice story to share with all here today, and you know, in my my war in the primary, because that's what it felt like. Yeah, I had my own little St. Patrick's battalion. I had Dan Kirk and Sally Daley and Paul O'Grady, and they were right behind me. They were my little Irish soldiers, and to this day I now refer to Paul as Pablo O'Grady. So I also want to take this time. I was at the parade on Saturday to thank Mayor Daley for all his years of service here in the city of Chicago. He's been a great mayor, and I think we all agree that he's done a tremendous job with this city. And also, personally, as a former state's attorney, the mayor really understands the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. He was one of the first people I met with after I won, and he was so excited and had all kinds of ideas because he really understands this office and he understands what we do, and he has a deep affection and admiration for our office. And so it was a pleasure working with him on some anti-violence initiatives. I knew he understood everything that we were going through, and it was nice to have that kind of support from City Hall. So during the recent campaign, I had the opportunity to meet with now our new mayor, Rahm Emanuel, and to discuss several public safety issues and the importance of the relationship between my office and the Chicago Police Department. So I look forward to meeting and working with the new mayor as he begins his journey as the mayor of the city of Chicago. This past year has been filled with important accomplishments, but also significant challenges for all of us working in law enforcement. Sadly, as you all know, we lost 5 Chicago police officers to senseless gun violence last year. And as the state's attorney and a member of the law enforcement family, I had the most solemn experience of attending the funerals and memorial services to these slain officers. Needless to say, it's tragic for all of us in ways that often cannot really be described. And so my office continues to investigate and prosecute these cases in full cooperation with the Chicago Police Department on behalf of our government, our citizens, and all the families of these brave officers. And speaking of family members of these officers, I would like to share a story about the funeral service of Chicago police officer Michael Flisk. If you remember, he was a Chicago police evidence technician who was shot and killed. It was the day after Thanksgiving as he was on duty processing a crime scene on the South Side. When he was murdered last November, Officer Flisk left behind a wife and 4 children, including his only daughter, Peg, who's a student at Marquette University, who he fondly referred to as Princess Peg. Just days after her father's senseless and brutal murder, Peg Flisk stepped up to the altar with her brothers at her side and delivered one of the most moving and loving eulogies that I have ever heard. There was not a dry eye in the chapel there at St. Rita that morning, and as this young lady spoke of her love for her father, her devotion to his wife and his children, and his calling and love for the job that he loved as a Chicago police officer. Well, last week, Peg Flisk walked through the doors of my office to pay a visit, not as a shattered crime victim, but as a proud member of the Queen's Court of this year's St. Patrick's Day Parade. And I cannot imagine the burden of pain and loss that this young lady carries with her, but she carries it with such extreme grace and dignity, and she reminded me once again of why I do this job and why we do this job as assistant state's attorneys. It's people like Peg and thousands of other families and victims like her that keep me and all of our assistants and our entire staff in my office motivated to save and serve the victims of violent crime and seek justice on their behalf. As you know, gun violence and other violent crimes continue to present an imminent threat to the public and to the significant challenge for police and average citizens in Chicago and throughout all of Cook County. As you recall, in 2009, the city of Chicago and Chicago Public Schools drew national attention in the wake of the savage beatings of Fenger High School student Darian Albert, which was captured on videotape and broadcast around the nation and the world to see. After a difficult but thorough investigation and working in full cooperation with the police department, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office charged 4 young men and 1 juvenile in connection with this brutal crime. At the time of this incident, the U.S. Attorney General and the Secretary of Education came to Chicago to talk about the outrageous example of student violence. They held press conferences to announce our city should receive attention from the federal government and that this incident should serve as a wake-up call to confront the epidemic of youth violence in Chicago. But as a state's attorney, I can tell you that it was sobering to watch the United States Attorney General and the Secretary of Education come to Chicago and recognize what my office has long known, that youth violence has reached intolerable levels and it requires the full commitment of all of our resources. My prosecutors and I live with this problem on a daily basis with our partners in law enforcement. We are on the front lines working to prevent and prosecute these types of cases. Since Darian Albert lost his life in that horrifying attack, and not very long after the national attention moved away from the case, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office obtained swift, measured, and appropriate justice for the offenders who punched, stomped, and beat him to death. The juvenile in this case has already been found delinquent by a Cook County jury of first-degree murder, will serve his time behind bars until he reaches the age of 21. One of the offenders has pled guilty and will serve 26 years in prison, and another, recently convicted, is scheduled to be sentenced tomorrow. The 2 additional offenders are now awaiting trial. This case is an example of the important work that my assistant state's attorneys do each and every day in seeking justice for victims like Darian Albert and the thousands of victims of violent crime throughout Cook County. Unlike Darian Albert's murder, most of the cases that we prosecute on a daily basis remain largely out of the public spotlight, but these crimes are no less important, and they dramatically affect the lives of the citizens of everyone here in Cook County. This past couple of months, it's been pretty intense in my office, and it was concerning all of the budget crisis that we're all experiencing. It was a measure that I brought to Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle and the Cook County Board of Commissioners last month when I presented my budget for the State's Attorney's Office. While there are so many things that I really love about my job, I have to be honest, there are a few things that I'm not very fond of, and one of them is preparing and presenting our annual budget to the Cook County Board. I am so sure we just completed that task, and it was very difficult, and I said earlier today at the table, sometimes I wish I was still trying jury cases, you know, in front of a jury. It's a little less intimidating to be in front of the county board. As I told President Preckwinkle from the start of our negotiations, I recognize the significant challenges she faces in attempting to balance the county's budget and dig our county out of this massive debt. I also told her that I accepted the fact that all agencies in Cook County must do their part to reduce spending in these difficult times. But I also expressed my view that all county agencies should not be measured with a cookie-cutter approach, but instead considered individually with an assessment of how the agency performs and how important its services are to the residents of Cook County. In my view, every agency in Cook County government was not created equal and does not perform equally. And when the Cook County Board faces necessary cuts in its budget, it's clear that Cook County faces such a crisis today. We've seen it. Those cuts must be laid upon waste and redundancy and not on vital public safety services which we provide. I believe it's bad public policy to undermine the funding of the county's own public interest attorneys. As prosecutors and government civil lawyers, the dedicated men and women of my office provide the highest level and quality of legal services for the victims and people of Cook County, and they do it at a bargain price far below market value. It took some pretty spirited public debate to come to terms, but I was very pleased that President Preckwinkle and the Cook County Commissioners were receptive to our position. Working together in a very creative collaboration, we were able to restore a good deal of the funding for my office that had originally been put on the chopping block. We have sustained cuts, including the layoff of 20 assistant state's attorneys and 6 court reporters and several investigators. We were also poised to lay off 100 members of our unionized administrative staff. But just last week, last Friday, these employees voted to accept the 10 annual furlough days in lieu of the layoffs. It's good news for us and for our office, and I want to commend President Preckwinkle for her leadership and her partnership in these efforts, because it wasn't an easy task. It's clear that the financial challenges facing Cook County government will not be solved in the short term, and I am hopeful that we will continue to work together in the best interest of public safety. While we were facing this financial crisis, one of the things that we set out to do when I took over is really try to look for alternative funding from other sources, because we knew we couldn't count on the county board to always give us what we thought we needed. So 2010 and the beginning of the fiscal year has had its share of really some painful moments for us, but there is some good news to report, and that is the grants that we were able to obtain in these last 2 years. I have aggressively sought out and obtained an unprecedented amount of grant money to fund important new safety public initiatives. In 2008, when I took over, the State's Attorney's Office had a total of $9.2 million in grants, with 111 positions funded on 22 programs. We ended 2010. We had doubled our efforts, capturing $18.4 million in funding to support 134 positions on 27 programs. That's a significant, we doubled the amount of grant money we were able to attend. Some of the new programs include several federal stimulus-funded initiatives, such as our new mortgage fraud investigation and prosecutions unit, which is up and running and already working to tackle a serious problem that affects so many Cook County residents and destroys the county tax base and the quality of life in all of our neighborhoods. We also received Recovery Act funding that is being used to enhance our response to internet crimes against children, our victim witness and sexual assault response units, and our cold case homicide initiative. It's been such a welcome to be able to get these grant monies so we can keep several programs up and running and really focus on some new programs that we saw we truly needed, particularly that mortgage fraud unit. And we have those assistants out in our community justice centers, which really helps our neighborhood offices. In the last case, if you remember, just last month, we had a family, a couple that lost their home. Well, it was already in foreclosure, but someone decided to just go and move into their house and rent it out. And that case came about because the woman walked right into our community justice center and with all her paperwork, and our assistants took it from there. And we're very proud that we're able to provide those services to all the residents of Cook County. Last year, we were also honored to be one of the 3 governmental agencies in the nation chosen to receive federal funding from the United States Justice Department to expand our efforts to combat human trafficking, particularly the trafficking of minor children, which is a priority of mine. The sexual trafficking of children is an increasing problem all across our nation, and while it's often thought of as just an international issue, that it happens in other countries, that it doesn't happen here, but I can tell you that it is happening right here in Chicago, literally in our own backyards. The state of Illinois currently has one of the highest rates of calls on the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless estimates that more than 6,000 at-risk children are being trafficked each and every year right here in Cook County. From the perspective of law enforcement, this can be a very, very challenging crime to investigate and to prosecute. The typical victims of sex trafficking are young girls and boys from troubled backgrounds who have been sexually victimized, have low self-esteem, and essentially a total lack of options in their lives, all of which makes this crime a potential perfect storm for street gangs or other criminal enterprises who prey on the vulnerable special victims. In a joint operation conducted last year between my office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the Chicago Police Department, we arrested and charged 3 men who are alleged to have been operating a prostitution ring on the city's west side. This group was forcing girls as young as 13 to work on the streets as prostitutes. In the aftermath of the investigation, the details that came from these girls about their treatment by these men were just truly heartbreaking. Each of the girls was given a street name by the pimp that was tattooed onto her chest, shoulder, wrist, or back. After being branded with their street name, these girls were forced to perform sexual services through meetings arranged on the internet. They were also forced to hit the streets and walk the track to search for customers. They were never provided with any money for any of these services. One of the girls, who was 15 at the time, told FBI agents that she often angered the pimp because she sometimes carried a teddy bear or a Bible when she was living with him, and that he would repeatedly scold her about acting her age. Another told a terrifying account of how the pimp used threats of violence to control the girls. She related how the man threatened to shoot her in the head and actually made her hold a pillow to her own head to act as a silencer, telling one of the other men to toss her into the trash after the pimp shot her in the head. The men made the girl beg for her life within earshot of the other girls as a means of intimidation to keep them all in line. And I know you would all agree that these are acts that cannot be tolerated in our society. And as a mother of 4 children, including 2 teenage girls, stories like this make me sick and they make me angry. As I settled into my job as state's attorney, I began to evaluate the way our office has traditionally handled juvenile prostitution. It became clear to me that we needed to make some dramatic changes in the way that we prosecute these types of cases. With that in mind, I created a human trafficking initiative in the state's attorney's office, which is now up and running. And the first thing is to get rid of those words, juvenile prostitution, because I don't know about you, but any little girl that's 11 or 12 years old isn't doing this on her own. She is truly a victim. So working with our state and federal law enforcement partners, my human trafficking prosecutors are conducting long-term proactive investigations into these targets, such as the arrest that I mentioned previously. We have also developed partnerships and helped obtain funding for local social service providers so that they can assist us during human trafficking takedowns and step up immediately to help provide services to these young victims. And they need services, they need long-term services. Last but certainly not least, working with our partners at the End Demand Illinois campaign and the Polaris Project, we drafted the Illinois Safe Children's Act. This new law has become one of the most comprehensive and sweeping pieces of legislation to be enacted across the country, and this is aimed at protecting children who are victims of sex trafficking. And as I said earlier, it decriminalizes juvenile prostitution and takes those words out of the statute altogether, because we focus on what do these kids really need. Are we helping them if we arrest them and throw them over at juvenile court for a day or two? How is that helping them? It's not helping them at all. And so what we decided to do and what we thought was the best practice was get them the services that they need. And we talk about when we work up these cases that they need to be victim-centered but not victim-built. And what I mean by that is that in the past all we would do was simply arrest the young person and arrest the pimp and then hopefully have her testify against him. Well, that wasn't working because for many reasons that you can understand, they don't want to testify. And what's the best way for us to handle these cases and get at the guy who's making money off of this, because there is somebody making money off of this. They run it as a business. And so this particular law helps us tremendously because it increases criminal penalties for the pimps and the customers of these prostitutes. And perhaps most importantly, the new law gives state prosecutors like myself the ability to use wiretaps in criminal investigations of human trafficking rings. If you consider this, before this law was implemented, local prosecutors here in Chicago could use wiretaps as a tool to go after people who were selling drugs. That's a given. But we could not use this important tool to go after people who were selling children. And that just doesn't seem right, and I don't think to anyone in this room. So while we're really just at the forefront of our efforts to crack down on human trafficking, we are already making great progress, and I think that we will be hearing much more about the results of our efforts in the next coming months. And I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to pass that piece of legislation on our first try, because as you know, we're not always successful in Springfield with some of our legislative initiatives. But this one was passed on our first try, and I was invited to a conference this past summer in New York by the new Manhattan DA, and we were the talk of the town because they were a little jealous that we were able to pass that law so quickly, because it took them 5 years in New York to pass a similar law, and ours is actually more comprehensive. So other states now are looking at it and looking to it in order to develop something for their respective states. So we're very proud of that initiative, and I think you'll see more cases coming out of it, more long-term investigations resulting in some takedowns. The last topic I'd like to discuss is an issue that has become a top priority during my administration, and that is the stepped-up investigation and prosecution of public and government corruption. When I ran for state's attorney, I listened and learned a lot from the voters, no matter where I was in this large county. And one of the topics that came up repeatedly was the issue of public corruption and the scandals that have given our state a very embarrassing reputation. Citizens are fed up, and rightfully so. They are sick and tired of watching their tax dollars being mismanaged or stolen by people who are supposed to be holding positions of public trust. We have been working very hard to attack this problem, and since I took office, we have prosecuted more than 50 defendants for wide-ranging public corruption offenses. Some of our larger cases include the indictment of the head of the Cook County Regional Office of Education for stealing public money, as well as charges against a Chicago police sergeant for stealing money from his own union fund, the Police Sergeants Union. Another case, charges of contract rigging, official misconduct, and theft against a top governmental aide to the former president of the Cook County Board, an investigation that remains ongoing today. Last year, I began a new initiative to target corruption at the local level, which we named Operation Cookie Jar. The ongoing effort is targeting public and government employees who have violated the public trust at the local level, including thefts from park districts, local village boards, and township government. In other words, people who are caught with their hands in the cookie jar. And at these level, at these municipalities, the taxpayer really feel it, right? They really feel it because it hits their school board, their school district, their park district. And so these cases may not always be high profile, but they are significant because it directly represents the problem of local corruption and the cost that this crime puts on the taxpayers. Believe me, if it's your school district or park district or someone is looting the funds, it has an impact on the local level and the local taxpayer. And just this past Friday, we charged another public corruption case involving the former executive director of the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County, also known as SWANK, a public agency that manages garbage collection for more than 20 north and northwest suburban communities. The defendant is now charged with stealing nearly $1 million, think about it, $1 million from the coffers of this agency over the course of a 4-year period. So it's pretty revolting when the strain of corruption robs the average citizen of money that they are paying for their garbage collection. Really, it's mind-boggling. There's just no tolerance for this kind of conduct, and as long as I am state's attorney, the issue will remain a top priority for me. It's my hope that our efforts in Operation Cookie Jar, as well as the large-scale prosecutions of corruption, will result in a lasting and fundamental change to the culture of corruption that has existed on so many different levels throughout Cook County. And so I want to thank all of you this afternoon for your attention. I appreciate the opportunity to share the details of, that's a kind of a Cliff Note version of what we've been doing in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for the past 2.5 years. And I'm really honored to be standing here in front of you as a state's attorney, and I will continue to work hard to make this and keep this the best prosecutor's office in the nation. On a lighter note, with the budget and so many other issues going on, it's really been a busy couple of months, and I'm very happy that there are only 24 days left until opening day. And of course, I'm talking about that Major League team on the south side, okay? I'm so looking forward to that. So thank you. Skinny?
How we doing?
Okay.
Oh, very good. We have some questions here. I'm Skinny Sheehan, and I just want to say that I had an opportunity to work in the state's attorney's office for Mayor Daley for 8 years. I don't know if there's any office that has the camaraderie and the go get, whatever you want to call it, the spirit that the state's attorney's office, and I know it's continued under Anita. It's a tremendous office. One of the questions I'd like to ask you, maybe you could just say, because it's something that people have, how many attorneys are in the state's attorney's office?
Right now we have 850, approximately 850.
So it's like a gigantic law firm.
It is.
The biggest law firm. You know what? I know State's Attorney Devine is here too. Former State's Attorney Devine. We want to say hello to Dick Devine, so thank him. I do have another question. I don't know if I can ask this, but I'm going to ask it. Are you allowed to prosecute the federal government? Does anybody prosecute them, or they prosecute themselves?
Do they commit a state crime, Skinny?
Oh, if they commit a state crime. All right, I was just wondering. Are medical centers, such as hospitals and abortion clinics, required by law to report child prostitution and/or statutory rape? If so, why is this law not enforced? If not, why not?
There are mandatory reporters, and hospitals are mandatory reporters. I guess specifically you're asking about the abortion clinics, and I don't know whether they're a mandatory reporter, but I know hospitals are, and they have to report when there is abuse or they suspect abuse.
And what about they have to report statutory rape too, right?
Right. If they suspect that there is abuse, obviously it gets reported and gets investigated.
Very good. Okay, here's another question. What resources or contacts are available for adult children and elderly parents who are being financially exploited by unscrupulous merchants. Unscrupulous is misspelled, by the way.
In our office, we actually have two units that would focus on that. Our consumer fraud unit, who looks into those allegations of consumer fraud, and our seniors unit, which really specializes on the elderly and elderly who are being abused. So there is some place that you can call in our office, the Seniors and Disabilities Unit or Consumer Fraud, either one, that will get you the information that you need. Mm-hmm.
Would you consider investigating the open corruption and shakedowns dealing with Cook County, the Cook County property tax system? I think this guy maybe this is someone that has some information for you.
Well, if you have information, please pass it along, because we'll look into anything if there's an alleged abuse. Obviously, in our Special Prosecutions Bureau, we have a lot of long-term investigations where we're looking into all kinds of corruption, whatever it might be. So if someone has information, our chief of our special process here, Jack Blakey, make sure you find Jack and give him your name and number, and we'll follow up.
Very good. If you have one major objective of your office for this year, what would it be?
I think what we need to do now that the dust is starting to settle with the budget is to be able to get back on track and focus on what we do, and that is serving the victims of crime of Cook County. We've got some other great innovative programs that are going on right now, and it's all being kind of pushed to the side because we had to focus just on maintaining what we need in a budget-wise. We are expanding, hopefully, our community justice centers and to be out in the community more, so that's a big focus for me and a goal for me. And as I said, this budget process really has been horrific for us these last couple of months, and the ups and downs. We're happy that the administrative people voted for the furloughs, so we'll get people back as opposed to letting them go. And I think we need to just kind of settle down and focus on what we do best.
Very good. And question is about with all the cuts and Governor Quinn slashing substance abuse programs funding, what change, if any, do you see for the therapeutic courts?
For all of the, Drug School is a program that each and every year we have to kind of fight to keep it funded, and it's a great program because it's something that should be expanded. In addition to Drug School, we do have the Mental Health Court, the Veterans Court, and those are courts, obviously, that serve a great purpose, and we don't want to see them go away. And I know it's difficult, and we're all kind of, cutting areas, but those are things that would help us in the long run, because if we could keep people out of the system, I think we would all benefit from that. I do have another program that, again, because we've all been focusing on other things, has not been highlighted, and that's a new program that we just started a week ago, and it's Offender Initiative Probation. And what that is actually giving people who deserve a second chance, a kid who picks up a felony that doesn't have any background, a non-violent felony, that we started a program where he will be put on intensive probation for a year. A lot of restrictions, a lot to go through before you're even picked for the program. But if you successfully complete it in a nonviolent crime, your case will be dismissed after that year, and this saves you a felony conviction. And it's a very innovative program. In fact, when I first started talking about it, some law enforcement people thought, wait, that's not supposed to be coming out of the state's attorney's office. But I think it's a good program because, again, if we can save some young people and keep them from getting further into the system, I think we all benefit from that. And so it's worth a try. We just started it, and it's kind of a pilot program right now, but we're hoping that it'll be successful, and it'll actually help us when we mount cases in court.
Very good.